I don't want to repeat too much of what James said. I do want to tell you, though, at the beginning of this, I said there are these different views, and he went over some of them. A couple of them here. The last one that's on the bullets that you see is the pre-wrath rapture view, and that one he didn't mention. And that one is that the church is raptured sometime during the last 3.5 years or during the Great Tribulation, but before the major outpouring of God's wrath. So that's another view that has actually gained some popularity. And if you go online to Amazon or Christian Book or whatever, and just type in pre-wrath rapture, there have been a couple of books written to try to support that perspective as well. So you do have a number of different views. And, when I was in seminary, one of the professors said, he said, I'm position number 5. I was like, what's that? He said, pan-trib. I'm pan-trib. I said, okay, what's that? Well, it'll all pan out in the end. Okay, So, and most of you have probably heard the whole axiom. It's like, well, plan for post, pray for pre. Everybody heard this? Okay, I thought that was funny as well. But what I'd like to do tonight is give you just 3 reasons. Kind of spelled them out here, but I'd like to give you 3 reasons why I support and agree with the pre-trib view. The first one is that the tribulation, from my lens, is about Israel and not the church. And specifically, if we look at Jeremiah 37, for instance, it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. And Jacob, of course, was renamed Israel. Okay? So not only do we see that, but when we look at Daniel, we see that his 70th week, as we read Daniel 9, is for your people and your city. So that essentially is pointing to the fact that this is a time, this period of time called the tribulation, is about God's future dealings with Israel. So what you notice in Daniel 9 as well, if you look at the quote there in the middle of page 1, it says, "Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering." So the idea there, between the lines, which you don't see written, but is obviously between the lines, is that there is a rebuilt temple and they are offering sacrifices. They're doing the practice of the Jewish law is occurring in Jerusalem, in physical Jerusalem at the time. So again, about Israel. So that's not conclusive, but it does carry some weight. I just want you to go further with me, because I think it's important. It shows one of the key differences between Israel and the church. Israel, if you think about it, is physical in nature. It's national. You're talking about a place, right? So it's national, it's physical in nature, and it's related by bloodline. Think about what you know about the beginnings of a couple of the Gospels. Matthew in particular, which is sort of the most Jewish of the Gospels. How does it start when it begins the story of the life of Jesus? Anybody tell me? See, beget, right? It's all about bloodline. It's all about physical bloodline and the relationships that are created by a physical bloodline. All right? If you think about the 12 tribes, okay, those were physical people, each of the, basically all of those 12 tribes came about physically, and it became a nation and a place. So the way I look at it, my lens, is that it's sort of like there are 2 parallel train tracks, Israel and church, in terms of God's plan, and they're parallel. They end up at the same destination, but they're different. They're different by that measure. That one is national and physical in nature, related to bloodline, whereas the church is, again, we see here, personal, spiritual in nature, and independent of bloodline, and it's a relationship is by spiritual birth. Spiritual birth. Okay? So, pull that into Revelation, because that's really our discussion here. If you pull that into Revelation, then you say, well, okay, if that's right, then if the tribulation is specifically about Israel in the absence of the church, is what I'm claiming, or what I would argue for, does Revelation support that? And here's what I would ask you to consider. if you think about what you know about Revelation, you know that Revelation 4:1 is sort of this dividing line, and that leading up to that, in chapters 1 through 3, you have including the 7 letters to the 7 churches, correct? And then after chapter 4, verse 1, it says, after these things, I heard a voice saying, come up here, and I'll show you what's about to take place after these things, right? So there's certainly that dividing line where the tribulation begins. Now, what's true of this, though, is that in chapters 1 through 13, or I'm sorry, 1 through 3, in chapters 1 through 3 of Revelation, how many times is the word church used? 19 times. 19 times, okay? So, while I understand that its absence doesn't necessarily mean that they're not there, but it's a conspicuous absence, okay, is what I would argue. It's a conspicuous absence. How do you use a word 19 times in 3 chapters and then fail to use it for the entire rest of the book until the war is all over, until the tribulation's all done? And even then, it's just a reminder to share all the things, to testify about all these things to the churches in its last occurrence, which means it occurred 20 times overall, but 0 times during the tribulation do we see the word. All right? Beyond that, if what we're saying is that the tribulation is specifically about Israel in the absence of the church, and what we should see is not only the absence of the church during the tribulation, but a complete focus upon Israel. And let's think about what we have encountered so far in Revelation. Chapter 4, the first picture that we're given of the throne room. The one who sits on the throne, how is he pictured? Jasper and sardius. Everybody remember Jasper and sardius? Well, Jasper and sardius symbolize what? We can say purity and the blood of Christ. We can talk about that, but what else? The first and the last what? Of the tribes of Israel. Okay? Jasper was Reuben's color, was Reuben's stone, and he was the first of the sons of Israel. And sardius symbolized Benjamin, who was the 12th. And that's the first thing that we see in chapter 4, is that the one who sits in the throne is symbolized by Jasper and sardius, signifying the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? That's significant, I'd say. Let's keep moving. Chapter 5, the elder speaks to John concerning Jesus. He says, behold the Lion of the tribe of Judah and the root of David. Okay? So, points to what? His physical lineage. Chapter 7, the 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. That's obvious enough. Chapter 11, the temple and those who worship there. The physical temple in Jerusalem is measured. And those who worship there. All right? So, at the end of chapter 11, the heavenly temple of God is seen along with the Ark of the Covenant, which is sort of the national symbol, right? In some respects. Okay. Chapter 12, the first and main character involved in the Great Tribulation is introduced. And what do we see? All right? A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Word picture points to Joseph's dream in Genesis 37, right? Where his mother and father, the son of the moon, and his dad was named? Israel. Thank you. Okay, and the 12 stars represent? 12 tribes of Israel. Great. Okay, so chapter 14, the Lamb is standing on Mount Zion, which is in Israel, with the 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. In chapter 17 and 18, Israel's great physical enemy, Babylon, is utterly destroyed. Okay, so what we see in terms of this context, if from my perspective, is not only do you have the conspicuous absence of this term church, which he uses like all over the place in the first several chapters, then just disappears and evaporates for the entire time of the tribulation, and there is a complete focus on the physical place of Israel and its role in tribulation. That works if the church is gone. Best, I think. All right? So, second reason. And I would argue that the church is promised an exemption from divine wrath. Now, it doesn't mean that we won't face wrath in this life from other people and from other situations, from nature, whatever else, that's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is divine wrath. Take, for instance, 1 Thessalonians 1:10, where we're waiting for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, whom God raised from the dead, even Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. Who delivers us from the wrath to come. That's, for me, that's, and I would say that tribulation is clearly an expression of God's wrath. And that's, believe it or not, is one of the reasons that some people will say it's a mid-tribulation, because they know that the last part, the great tribulation, is specifically, the great wrath, God's great wrath outpoured during the bowl judgments. So you have some people who will, posit the mid-tribulation view just because of that. But here's what I want you to see. Let's take a look at Revelation 6, for instance. Kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, and every slave and every free man hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Notice that it says there, and that's just at the end of chapter 6, where we have the seals going on. So that's still early in the game in terms of the tribulation. And there he says his great wrath has come. Has come, if you think about the way we use verbs, means it already started, it's already here, and now it's just continuing. It already started some time ago, and now it's just continuing. All right? So, Revelation 11:18, the nations were angry, and your wrath has come. Notice it's the same kind of verb, has come. It's already been here, it's just continuing. Time of the dead, that they should be judged. You should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, small and great. Should destroy those who destroy the earth. Okay, so you got, again, this idea of has come. Revelation 14. Notice the end of this passage in 18 through 20. The angel thrust, this is talking about during the Great Tribulation, says, the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth, threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city. Blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs. That's pretty wrathful, I'd say. I'd say that's pretty bad. Okay. Yeah, I'd say a pretty good indication. Revelation 15:1. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues or bowls, for in them the wrath of God is complete. And finally, Revelation 16:19. Now the great city was divided into 3 parts. The cities of the nations fell. Great Babylon was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. All right? So, yeah, there could be no doubt that if we just look at the book, the book of Revelation, what we find is that tribulation period is a time of the wrath of God, which has come. All right? So, I don't think any of us would argue with that, but look at how Paul talks about that, uses that idea as he speaks about it. 1 Thessalonians 1:10, which we've already mentioned. We wait for his Son from heaven, whom God raised from the dead, even Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. All right, so it says, while Thessalonians and other believers are certainly not delivered from men's wrath, in this life you will have trouble, right? At the same time, Paul states that we will be delivered from a future wrath, whatever that is, the one that's coming. Romans 5:9, much more than, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath. All right? So, and you might argue that wrath here is eternity in hell, but that's not the way wrath is generally used throughout the rest of the New Testament. Okay? So, and we just saw the way it's used as we look through those passages in Revelation. And finally, Revelation 3:10, he says, because you've kept my command to persevere, I'll also keep you from the hour of trial which shall come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. In other words, unbelievers. Okay? So, knowing that that's a part of the larger exhortation in Revelation 2 and 3, that larger exhortation is, let those who have ears to hear what the Spirit says to the churches, right? Okay? So that's part of that larger exhortation. And not only that, when he says there, he says, I will keep you from, in Greek, the preposition there is ek. And ek as a preposition in Greek has the idea that if there's a circle, and I say that I am ek of the circle, that means I am outside of it. I am outside of it. I'm out here somewhere, okay? There's a circle, and I'm on the outside. That's what that preposition indicates. And if you ever get a cheat sheet of Greek prepositions, they'll draw a circle and a line, and they'll talk about dio, where we get diameter, and give you all those ideas of what those Greek prepositions, how you kind of locate them. And guess what? It's always on the outside. Okay? So is that important? Yeah. To me, it has some bearing on the issue. Okay? But let's go beyond that, and let's look at 1 Thessalonians 5. And Pastor James mentioned this as well, but I'd like you to take a look at it from a little bit different perspective. He says, concerning the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write you, for you yourselves know perfectly the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman. They shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. You are sons of light, sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep. And he goes on, and then he jumps down, and that's the next bolded section. Look at what he says. For God did not appoint us to wrath. Read again. God did not appoint us to wrath. Okay? But to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him. Notice what he goes on to say. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Comfort one another with these words. And in the same passage that we talked about the rapture occurring, which is 1 Thessalonians 4:15 through 18, where he talks about the, Lord descending with a shout and the trumpet and those kinds of things, he ends that section with the same exhortation. Comfort one another with these words. Comfort one another. Okay? Think about this. We've talked about, we're not appointed to wrath. He delivers us from the wrath to come. How would they have heard that? See, I would argue that they would have heard that in the context of there's a wrath coming. And it's a 7-year period where God's going to whoop up. And guess what? Jesus delivers you from that. That's the way I would argue. All right? And is that a comfort? Yeah. Yeah. From my perspective, yeah, that's a comfort. And, okay, and not to be facetious, but it's like, okay, yeah, you're going to get raptured. You're going to meet the Lord in the air as long as you don't get your head chopped off. Okay? The comfort there, in terms of how much that comforts me, okay, right here, there's a little gap. Okay? From my perspective, there's a little gap there. And for me, I really kind of go, wait a minute. For him to be just so much like, yeah, comfort each other with this. Comfort each other with the idea that you're not appointed to wrath. You're not appointed to wrath. Okay? You're going to be delivered from that. So, I would argue that the way they would have heard that is that there is a wrath coming. And guess what? He's saying, not going to be there. Okay? That would be my lens. All right, and by the way, that passage is the passage that we get the word rapture from, which is actually the Greek word harpazo, and I think I put the Latin is rapturo, and that's where we get this rapture term from. But it's like this snatching away or being snatched up or caught up, okay? So again, all we're talking about here is where does that take place, right? Okay, all right, so again, I would argue that across the New Testament, essentially, there is this idea of a coming wrath, and that Scripture teaches that the church is going to be delivered from that. We're exempted. Okay? So that, for me, argues in favor of a pre-tribulational rapture. But let me give you the third reason. And it is that we are the bride of Christ. And we talked about Ephesians 5, or Pastor James spoke a little bit about Ephesians 5, but I'd like to shed a little light on it tonight, because I think a lot of times we talk about that, and we hear, bride of Christ, that, Christ is the groom and we're the bride, or husband and wife, in Ephesians 5, you have that comparison. And I'm going to use those terms interchangeably tonight, okay? So just beware that I'm going to talk about it in terms of the Jewish ceremony, or the Jewish wedding ceremony. Has anybody studied this by any chance? Okay, so this will be good new information for you. All right, let me ask another related question, and just by way of introduction to this subject. How many of you have ever been to like a Seder or a Passover dinner, where they talk about the Jewish tradition of the Passover dinner, right? And what does that have to do with? Every little part of it has to do with what? What do all the little pieces point to? The matzah, the unleavened bread, has both stripes and wounds. Christ. Significance is, okay, and during the thing, that matzah bread, or that wounded and striped bread, is wrapped up and hidden. Sounds like the burial, right? And then it's found, right? Sounds like resurrection. Okay, so everybody gets the idea, and as a matter of fact, I think the church is hosting a Passover Seder, a Seder, right at the end of March. So, man, I would encourage you to go to it, because if you've never been, it's amazing. It's every little detail relates to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It all points to Jesus. It all points to Jesus. It's amazing. So if you haven't been, please make plans to go hear that. What I'm going to argue is, just as that experience, or the Seder, points to Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, the Jewish marriage ceremony points to our relationship with Jesus and our future with Him. Okay? So let's start there. I'm going to pick it apart for you. Essentially, the Jewish marriage ceremony, traditionally, in ancient times, had two parts: the betrothal and the marriage ceremony. Betrothal and marriage ceremony. Now, the betrothal was similar to what we would call engagement, with the exception that, in their case, once you were betrothed, you were considered married. It was considered binding. In fact, the only way to undo it was through a certificate of divorce. Okay, you read the story of Joseph and Mary, when Joseph found out that Mary was pregnant, right? Okay, same deal. He was betrothed to her, but they had not yet had their marriage ceremony. So you got, this betrothal period going on, where Joseph finds this out. And that was a problem for him, of course, at least initially. All right, let's take a look at the pieces or steps in the betrothal part of the Jewish wedding ceremony, all right, or the ancient Jewish wedding. First of all, the groom's father generally was the one who chose the bride, not the son, and he would send a friend to come to terms with the parents of the prospective bride. Sounds like? Who was chosen before the foundation of the world? We were in Christ, right? Okay? And Jesus pretty much says as much several times in the Gospels. But it also lines up with the Holy Spirit being the one who is sent to do what? Convict and bring us into a relationship or into a union with Christ, right? He, when he comes, will convict the world concerning sin, righteousness, and judgment, right? So and he always points to Jesus. Holy Spirit always points to Jesus. Okay? So, secondly, the price was secured for the bride, and it was usually something of great value. Sounds like? Who paid the ultimate price? Right? Okay, everybody, hopefully what you're seeing is just starting to line up just a little bit, so we're going to keep going. Betrothal ritual was like an engagement party. The promise of marriage was made, and the betrothal was sealed when the groom lifted a cup of wine in his right hand, gave it to the bride, and she willingly drank from it. Sounds like. Wow. All right. The offer of eternal life based on the blood of Jesus Christ, which is a free gift, which we decide, whether we will trust or not, whether we will drink or not, right? Okay. That wouldn't bode well with Father 2, if you remember. Those of you who've seen the Five Fathers, they probably wouldn't like that part. But bottom line is, she had a choice. And once we accept Christ's offer, we're sealed with the Spirit. And that drinking from the cup was considered the seal of the betrothal. All right? So, marriage contract was written up, and in the contract, the groom promises to provide and care for his bride in every way. Okay? Contract was always signed before two witnesses, then given to the bride. But I want you to think with me, the groom promises to take care. The groom promises to provide. Sounds like grace. I don't know about you guys. It sounds like grace to me. It sounds like it's up to him and what he does. It's not about anything I do. He simply says, look, I favor you. I favor you. All right? At this point, the bride and the groom share a cup of wine to signify their unity, called the shared cup of the brit, or the covenant. Brit is covenant, Hebrew for covenant. The two are now considered fully married. Gifts were then given to the bride and her family. So obviously this has the idea of our unity with Christ based on his blood, right? And what else? What about the gifts? What happens when we become a believer? The gift of eternal life. What else? We get spiritual gifts, right? As far as the church is concerned. So, lines up. Lines up. Let's keep going. All right, the bride would then have a ritual immersion, or mikvah. For those of you who are familiar with that term, that was their version of baptism, where they were completely immersed. And that signified that she was leaving her life as a single woman and entering in her new life as a wife or bride. Okay? Wow. It also symbolized her desire to live for, to live for her husband, and I'm going to write that in there so for future reference, and to remain pure until his return. And of course that idea of sanctification and dedication, commitment, and all those kinds of things rolled into that of I'm leaving my old life behind and I'm pursuing this new life with my new husband. All right? Symbolism carry over? Yeah. And we still practice baptism, of course, and it still signifies, guess what? We've left our old life behind, right? We're dead. We're buried with Christ into the likeness of his death and raised in order to walk in newness of life. Walk in newness of life. Wow. Okay? Everybody having fun with this so far? Is it new information for most of you? This is so cool. I mean, when I started studying this, I was like, wow, this is fun. Okay. All right. And yes, I promise it'll get more and more relevant as we go further. All right? Okay. In fact, here we go. Shortly after this, the groom would leave and go back to his father's house to prepare a place for the wedding ceremony and his new bride. Sounds like? And what did he say? And what did he say in John 14? I go to prepare a place. Okay? All right? I'm going to give new meaning to whole chunks of this, guys. It's so fun. All right. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. You believe also in me. Oh, and before he left, he gave a pledge of his return. Okay? Now read John 14, after I just said that. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go prepare a place for you, I will come again. I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Sounds like? Okay. All right. Gets better. Gets better. Now, what I want you to notice is, here the groom leaves. He goes back to his father's house. Sounds like? Ascension of Jesus, right? Okay. And of course, part of that equation is that they normally would give the best man charge to make sure that the wife bride was taken care of, and that best man sounds like the Holy Spirit. All right? So, and he's with us until the groom returns. But the idea here is the groom has left. But guess what? Up till this point, marriage has never been consummated. They're considered fully married. But the groom has to go back to prepare a place, and part of preparing a place was preparing the wedding chamber. Okay? Which is called the chuppah, by the way. Okay. And you're going to hear me say that several times again just because it's so much fun. I mean, you know, wedding chamber, chuppah, you know. Pretty interesting that the Hebrews would use a word like that, you know. I'm sure it has an interesting root, but it just sounds good in English, doesn't it? Okay. Especially in the context. All right. All right. The groom leaves. He goes back to his father's house. Best man comes to take care of the bride. Right? So we're all with that. But then comes the time of waiting. And guess what? Bride doesn't know when that's going to be. Guess who knows? Only the father of the groom. And the father of the groom is waiting for the groom to prepare the place so that when he knows that that place and that chuppah is ready, he can send the son back for his bride. Pretty cool? Okay. So, what does that say to us? When we look through the New Testament, how many times is we have a hope? We have a hope, you know? And certain passages that we read is like, wait a minute, you know, our groom is coming back for his bride. The bride is the church. All right. Okay. Here's where it gets interesting. This is the wedding ceremony, which typically took place a year or two after all of those betrothal events and the departure of the groom. The groom is gone. He's prepared the place. He's got the wedding chamber ready. And then he comes back. Take a look. Ancient Jewish wedding ceremony, it was something like a voluntary kidnapping. Starting to sound a little familiar? Keep going. The groom and his friends would sneak up on the bride unexpectedly, but would announce their arrival for her with the blast of a... Yeah. Sounding real familiar? Okay. What would happen then? He would take her away to the place he had prepared for her. Okay? Remember 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and 17. The Lord will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of archangel, with the trumpet of God. Okay? Then we who are alive and remain shall be, you know, the dead, Christ will rise first. We who are alive and remain shall be caught up, you know, raptured together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Okay? So, sounds like a rapture, right? Okay? When is it? Take a look. When they arrived at their new home together, 7 blessings were said over the couple, and then they shared a cup of wine together. Anybody think of anything in the Gospels that would relate to this? Think about the Last Supper. Remember what Jesus said at the Last Supper? What did he say? He's not going to do it again until I drink it with you when you're with me. Ah, cool, huh? All right? That makes it, everybody fitting together for everybody so far? What happens next? After the 7 blessings, chuppah. Chuppah time. Okay? All right? Time for the consummation of the marriage. This would be the start of their honeymoon. So the marriage would be consummated, the two would become one flesh. All right? This is a time for them to be together alone, away from all others. They were in this room, they were in this wedding chamber, this chuppah, okay? And how long did the chuppah last?
7 days.
And 7 days equal 1 week. The same amount of time as Daniel's 70th week. All right? Okay. So, they're enjoying their 7-day honeymoon in the chuppah, all right? Alone, together, with no one around. so that they can get to know each other. It's their honeymoon. It's their honeymoon. They are alone together in the place that he has prepared for them. Okay? For 7 days. Hear it. Hear it. If the rest of the picture fits, what does this mean? If the rest of these pieces of the puzzle fit as far as the traditional Jewish marriage, if they have merit, and if they all have a piece of if they all are a piece of the puzzle that fits together correctly, what does that mean? We're having our honeymoon during that 70th week. We're on our honeymoon. We're in the chuppah. Okay? We're getting to know our Savior. We're getting to know Jesus face to face. You know? Yeah. Comfort one another with these words. All right. So, pretty cool. Pretty cool. Right after the 7 days of chuppah, the couple would come out of the room and they would join. I just like saying the word. It's fun. You know, it's not a bad word.
They're married.
It's just fun to, yeah, I'm married. Hey. Okay. So right after those 7 days, the couple would come out of the room and they would join their invited guests. Now wait a minute. In the analogy that we drew from Ephesians 5 and other places, the bride is the church, right? Okay. And the groom or the husband is Jesus. Okay. So what this says is, after the 7-day honeymoon, the bride and the groom come out to join their invited guests and begin the marriage feast after the 7-day.
So the new believers are their guests.
Yeah. And the Jewish believers, the Jews, you know. Yeah. So you have Israel that's been saved. You have all the believers who have been saved during this time, but the church's already gone. And that's why I would argue that, yes, they're believers. Yes, they're covered with the blood of Christ. So is Israel during this time. You know, they've trusted their Messiah. So that's not the issue. The issue is, where's the church here? And I would say the church is on their honeymoon. You know, been announced by the trumpet. Groom's come to snatch them away. He's taking them back to the house that he's prepared, the chamber that he's prepared. At the end of that, he comes out with his bride, and they begin the wedding feast, right? And where's the wedding feast take place in Revelation? Revelation 19, when it's all over. Right at the end of 7 days, or 1 week, or tribulation. Okay. So, take another look at John 14, 1 through 3. Try to read it. In my Father's house there are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Isn't that cool? My argument, my lens, is that the church belongs to Jesus. He's our groom. He's our husband. And he will come again one day, like that, unexpectedly, at a moment we do not know, that only God the Father knows. And in that moment in time, we will be snatched up to go on our honeymoon. Amen? That's why I believe Pre-Trib View is where I stand.